Good evening and welcome to another piano lesson with Warren. My name is Warren McPherson. In today's tutorial, I want to talk about the augmented seventh chord for you guys. In my last tutorial, I talked about the diminished seventh, how you can use it in your progressions. And in this one, we're going to talk about the augmented chord. Okay, so first thing, the word augmented means to expand, to broaden, to make bigger. In the last video, I talked about diminished chords, and diminished means to compress, to make smaller. And now augmented is to make bigger. And as always, I'll start off with the triad, just a 3-note chord. And if you take any major chord and you take the 5th note and raise it a half a step, you get that nice augmented sound right there. It's that simple. Take any major chord, raise the 5th a half step, and you get the augmented 7th chord. Now let's talk about the makeup of the chord. The augmented 7th chord, like the diminished 7th chord, is symmetric, meaning the intervals between the notes are the same. In the diminished chord, it's 2 minor third stacked to give you the diminished. In the augmented, it's the opposite. It's 2 major third stacks that gives you the augmented triad. And that's all you got to remember. If I take 2 major thirds and I stack them, I get the augmented 7th chord. Again, if you want a quick refresher, a major third is made up of 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just a quick refresher, whenever you're counting intervals, you got to think of it as counting footsteps. You step, then you count. So you step, then you count 1. You don't want to say 1 because you haven't moved yet, so that's not an interval. So from C to C sharp, we call that 1, C sharp to D 2, D to D sharp 3, and D sharp to E 4. And that's how you get your major third. A major third has 4 half steps. And you stack 2 major thirds, you get an augmented triad. Now, whenever there's a symmetric chord or scale on the piano, it means it limits the amount of existence of those chords. So because augmented chords symmetric, meaning the intervals on both sides are equal, they're major thirds, that means there's only going to be a limited amount of augmented chords. In this case, it's only 4 of them. C augmented, C sharp augmented, D augmented, E flat or D sharp augmented, and that's it. 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason for that is because each augmented chord also is basically an inversion of other chords. C augmented is also E augmented. See? This is E major with a sharp 5. It's E augmented, but it's also an inversion of C. If I take this E augmented and I invert it again by putting the E at the top, I get A flat augmented chord. That's A flat major, sharp to 5. I get A flat augmented. But it's also an inversion of C, and it's also an inversion of E. So each augmented chord is an inversion of 2 other chords. If I go up to C sharp, it's the same thing. It's an inversion of F, because this is F augmented. It's an inversion of A. D augmented is also an inversion of F sharp or G flat augmented, and it's also B augmented, B flat augmented. E flat augmented is also G augmented, and it's also B augmented. And so when we multiply 3 times 4, we get 12, and that covers our 12 pitches on the piano. So there's only 4 augmented triad. Simple, yeah? So once you know all those 4, you basically know all the augmented triads. Now, when do you use this augmented triad? In my opinion, it's predominantly used as a passing chord. What if I am say I'm in C and I want to get to A minor? You can use an augmented triad to sort of get to that A minor. Check it out. So I just raise that fifth, and you can hear that it's going to A minor. Sometimes you'll hear progressions like this. They're just messing with that augmented to the sixth. In this case, you can call this like a C sixth or an A minor / C and resolve. Sometimes they just walk that all the way up to the dominant seventh, so you can have. So that's one way you can sort of mess with the augmented triad. It works nicely too when it's in the middle of the chord. A lot of songs have used this progression. Good thing, nice thing you can do when you're vamping on a particular chord. So that's the triad. Now, let's add sevenths to it. Now, there are two types of sevenths. We have major sevenths, and we have dominant sevenths. The dominant seventh is what's predominantly used with the augmented chord. You can have an augmented major seventh. You can. I don't really use this chord much. I probably have, but not much. So that would be the augmented major seventh right there. This one, the augmented seventh, is used a lot. I use this a lot. And this is what it looks like. Just the augmented triad with the seventh. The dominant seventh, also known as the minor seventh. This interval is a minor seventh. Now, earlier we talked about there's only 4 augmented chords, triads. When you add a seventh to that now, it changes. There's no longer 4. There's 12 augmented seventh chords. The reason being, check this out. This is C augmented seventh, yeah? If I invert it, that's not E augmented seventh. It's still C augmented seventh in first inversion, E augmented seventh / E. You know, sometimes you'll see this chord written as a C plus 7 or a C AUG 7, same thing. But note that the inversions are not, it doesn't work anymore, the inversions. And the reason being is that it's no longer symmetric. Now we just have an interval of a second right here. Yeah? So it's no longer an inversion of another augmented seventh chord. This is just still an augmented seventh chord. This can be considered an augmented chord add 9, but I'd probably just still stick to calling it C augmented 7 / A flat, whichever way you want to call it, yeah? So just want you to note that once you add seventh to the augmented chord, it's no longer just 4 of them, but 12 individual augmented seventh chord, yeah? So that's a good thing to note. Now, when do you use the augmented seventh chord? It works great when you're doing a 2/5 passing. For example, I'm in a key of C. If I want to get to 4, I can do a 2/5 passing going to 4. So I did a G minor 9th, then a C augmented 7, and then I resolve it to a F major 9. When you're using alterations on the chords like that, the voicing is what makes a huge difference. Now, look how I'm voicing my chord. This is my G minor ninth. This note is going to resolve to the sharp 5 of the C. So you see how I'm voicing it? I have my 1, I have my 7, I have my 3rd, and I have my sharp 5 here. And this is a voicing I tend to use a lot. And then this resolves to the major 9. So I have this nice stretch. If your hands can do that, it's an interval of a 10th and the 5th in between. And so you have this descending so that's one way you can use it in 2/5 passing. You can also use it whenever you generally go to a 5 chord. That's it again right there. Whenever you have a 5 chord, you can make that 5 chord a dominant 7th with the sharp 5, or an augmented 7th chord. Now, you got to be careful. You always have to be listening out for that melody, whatever is happening with the melody. For example, what if the melody is a D and I'm on a G? I start messing with that sharp 5 and it can create some dissonance. And this is where now you got to get creative with the voicing. I'm not saying you can't use an augmented 7th there. You just don't want to use it in that same register where the melody is. So for example, if the melody, the other rule is I like to keep the melody on the top. So if I want to use an augmented 7th chord and my melody is a D, to avoid that sort of dissonant that it creates, I might just revoice this chord and, I don't know, put the D at the top. So you could probably have something like this. Now this chord, the way I'm voicing it, is going to be named something else. Because now I have the D sharp and I have a D. So in this case, it would most likely be considered sort of like a flat 13th. Yeah. But if I really want to use an augmented chord there with a melody on the D, I would revoice it so that the melody is on the top and you really hear that melody sticking out. So that's just some tips about how you can revoice the chord to avoid dissonance when you're altering the chord. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with the augmented 7th chord, the augmented 7th chord works nicely with a sharp 9th or a flat 9th. And once you throw a sharp 9th or a flat 9th in the augmented 7th chord, it becomes what we know as the altered chord. That chord right there. So the build-up or makeup of that chord would be the 3rd, the sharp 5, the 7, the sharp 9, or the flat 9. Pretty chord. Now, the way I like to voice this chord is what we call using the sort of chordal harmony. Chordal harmony. So I create an interval, I create I can't speak today. I create these stacked fourths, sort of they call chordal harmony. Herbie Hancock used this voicing a lot, and a lot of the jazz guys, they use this voicing, the chordal harmony. So I put the 7, the sharp 9, and the sharp 5 in my right hand, and I play the root and the 3rd in my left hand. And that, you get that nice jazz sound right there. Some of the times I like to move this chord chromatically down. So going back to my example of using a 2/5 passing going to F, if I'm in the key of C, I can do And you see how I use that nice altered chord right there. That's just the augmented seventh with a sharp 9. Again. You can do it with the flat 9 also. And that's how you can use the augmented chord. Let me see something. I just ran the Phrygian scale over that chord. C Phrygian. Actually, I missed a G. There are a couple scales you can run over that, and I'll be doing courses on that. So that's it for augmented chords, guys. Yeah? Go experiment with your augmented seventh chords. Create alterations, altered chords, sharp 9s, sharp 5. Use those sharp 9s and sharp 5 on the dominants. Whenever you have a dominant seventh chord, if you're doing a 2-5 passing, make that 5 chord an alteration, an augmented seventh with the sharp 9, flat 9, and you'll start to get that nice jazz gospel sound. All right? My name is Warren McPherson. Thank you for watching. As always, keep listening, keep singing, and keep practicing, because this is how you'll continue to grow as a musician. See you soon, and catch you in the next tutorial.